Haven't I taken a class with you before?
Did you take VCU votes?
No, I would think it was like something with Fortenheim.
I remember you.
You're about to say, okay, I think that's where I
Yeah,
remember you
I
from.
remember you.
Okay.
I don't remember what class it was though.
Comparative politics. I took them for comparative politics and then international law, and that's it. But this
So
was like
probably the
years
same thing.
ago. It was like years, maybe
Yeah.
two.
Are you
Yeah.
graduating in May?
I do graduate next week. How about you?
Yes. I'm
Yes,
very excited. I
congratulations.
feel like, thank you to you too. I feel like this last couple of weeks has been so much work and I'm like not done yet. I won't be done until I think my last assignment is due May 4th. So it's been like crazy. I feel like I haven't had time to like do anything else. I've been so busy on my laptop, which
Mm-hmm.
is fine, but I'm very ready to be done and like close my laptop for a couple weeks. So I'm very excited about that because I feel like I've just been going, going, going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same way, like that kind of burnt out type of feeling a little bit because my last assignment isn't due to like May 5th. So that's
Yeah.
what like two Mondays from now. So I'm just
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm just trying to get things over and done with. So
Yeah. Yeah. It
Morning.
is crazy.
hey Ricky.
Hey guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right.
Are you graduating in May, Ricky?
I am sorry, I was trying to pull up all the docs. I am. How about yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You too, Shanna.
Yeah.
Right. Just trying to get all the last.
Very excited.
Yeah.
How has your schedule been? Mine has been like busy. Shane and I were just talking about how busy we've been and all the assignments and the last assignment date and all that fun stuff.
That
So,
that part. Yeah, I can't wait. Like May 10th can't come fast enough.
yes.
It
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, it's 10 o'clock, but
Oh, I didn't even
there's
realize. But we're supposed
yeah.
to start, I believe.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
are. It says don't wait. So I think we're missing two people.
Two. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Well, the three of us will go ahead and get started. You guys both
Yep.
have the final discussion club doc open.
I'm pulling it now.
Yeah, I do, but I also have a question before we start. I seen in perfect. I seen in her hey, I seen in her email that she said we could stop at 11:15 if we would like.
Yep.
How do you guys feel about that?
I'm good with that. It's Sunday. I've got lots of things to do. So I am fine with that. Whenever y'all are done discussing, we can move on.
I think there's only four of us. Because there's only four of us, we'll be able to stop even shorter. So
Yeah.
unless
Yeah.
the fifth
Unless the
person
fifth
joins.
person. Yeah. Okay. I'll introduce myself. And then whoever wants to go next. So I'm Lily. I'm a senior. My major is criminal justice and political science. I think that was all of that. Yeah. Senior, political science, criminal justice.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I'll go next. I'm Ricky Senior and I'm economics.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm Shauna. I'm also a senior, and I'm majoring in poli-sci with a concentration of government and politics.
Today, your last.
I'm sorry, I'm Danae. My major is political science, the concentration in international relations, and I'm a junior. Is that it? Okay.
Yes.
And then we're just gonna have an icebreaker question to answer too.
I'll go. So for me, for the second half of class, so Unit 10 really interested me because I feel like there was a lot of lore with it. I feel like there was like drama, and then like with Trump now being the current president, I feel like it kind of showed for people that maybe didn't know his full character, it kind of like really brought his full character and like how convincing he is and how like he is manipulative and he pulls people in, and like it was very interesting to kind of see how like Graham was, and like how he at one point didn't like Trump at all, and then in turn he like became Trump's best friend and was lying for him. So I really think that was super interesting to kind of see how their relationship initially was not great, and then Trump was really starting to convince him, and then he was out in the media like talking and backing Trump. And so I really liked this unit a lot. I think it had a lot of like twists and turns and kind of brought full characters to the surface. So I really enjoyed all the different things that Unit 10 brought.
Fab. Anybody want to go next? I'm looking for her actual email with the icebreaker questions in them. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll go. For me, I really feel like I'm stuck between Unit 8 and Unit 10, only because it reminds me of like a saying that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And looking back at the unit, talking about like the early 2000s with Gore and Bush, and then comparing that literally to now, it's literally things well, maybe not this generation, but generations before us have seen before. And it's just crazy to me how like it's literally book by book, play by play, even when it comes to like voting ballots and trying to hurry up and get those counts in. And we literally just seen that within the past election. So it's just I feel like, yeah, all of it is pretty interesting, but it's because it's just maybe too relatable, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Piggybacking off what you say, I completely agree with Unit 8. Um, I mean, obviously, showing my age, I wasn't born yet, so I didn't know a lot about this election. And I definitely history repeats itself or rhymes because, yeah, when I read it, I like when I sorry listened to it a lot, I was like, oh, that sounds a lot like the 2020 election, or that it kind of took everything we've learned, it feels like, and put it into one example, like with voting fraud and how ballots work and stuff like that. And it just took it all and made it in one example. And it was interesting to me because in the end, Gore ended up kind of like ending the polarization between the two parties. But we see how we didn't learn from that. And then in the current election, we kept the divide and we made it even worse. So yeah, I thought 8 was the most interesting. And to be honest, this whole thing was kind of like a hard listen and read because it just frustrated me because it's like we have the evidence, but we still managed to put him back in office. But yeah.
For me, I think it was 9. So showing my age, I was around for all of this. And I remember like the Tea Party and their big kind of march on Washington. But I was kind of checked out of politics, right? Working on just focusing on my career. I thought that the Republican Party became the Tea Party. I didn't know until kind of listening to these episodes that the Tea Party that started with the conservative right or the Christian right actually made a concerted effort to take over the Republican Party because they didn't find any success, right, running as third party candidates because states like Ohio and Virginia are sometimes not too friendly to third party candidates. So instead of trying to run as like libertarians, they're like, well, we'll just take over the Republican Party from the inside. So for me, it was number 9. All right. So now we have discussion questions, right, that we're supposed to get into.
Yes, I think so, but I think we start with Unit 8, correct? And
Yeah,
then
it goes by unit, and
okay.
then yep.
Okay. If anybody wants to start,
All right, let's see
I'm
this
gonna
question.
pull it.
All groups. What did you know, if anything, about the fallout from the 2000 election? I'll take that one. I'll start that one. Or about the 2020 election, right? About the 2020 election prior to, I mean, this one I was super duper like involved with. The first time they actually voted, like full disclosure, was for the Al Gore election. That was like the first time that I cast my vote. So I paid a lot of attention to that one, paid a lot of attention to like W and then Obama. So by then I kind of understood electors and counting of votes and all that good stuff and certifying votes. I kind of knew everything. I was so frustrated like you guys because I could see that blatantly. It wasn't even a question, right? Of like, is there a concerted effort to negate the actual election process? So yeah, I knew that there was. You can argue whether or not, who caused January 6th, but the fact that they were trying to certify fake electors in states, and the fact that there was a break-in in Congress, and that the break-in in Congress was meant to actually overturn the results and not have Mike Pence actually certify results, that I was fully aware of, and watching the TV, like, there's no way that this can happen, right? Not here, not in this country.
Wow, that's so perfect. I really appreciate like your personal like insight when it comes to this, and then like related it to like actually like what we're listening to. It kind of like puts me in like a great perspective of like then like versus now. But I'll jump in like for this question. So like prior to engaging in those ballot battles that they were like talking about throughout this like listen in the January 6th like report summary. I think the knowledge that I had, like maybe before the fallout of the 2020 election, was like likely like censored, like widespread controversy that was going on regarding the election process as well as like the aftermath. So it was like as soon as the 2020 election happened, like the heat, the intensity, I didn't know obviously like January 6th was like going to come about. It was really like surprising to me that, and even now I don't feel like consequences were really dished out, because I just know like if there were like a different group of demographic, I feel like it would have been different. But that was just like my knowledge, like my feelings about it. But the 2020 election, like overall, it saw like unprecedented like attention to issues such as like ballot counting, the mail-in voting, and like allegations of like fraud, even from this past election as well. Um, which led to like that intense debate in like those legal challenges uh, prior versus like prior elections. And then when it comes to like the media coverage of things, I feel like it really highlighted delayed results. I remember sitting there watching everything going. I was like, wait, it's this time, but it's not really matching up with like the coverage that was being shown to me on the news. I do not remember what news outlet, but yeah, that was just all my knowledge that I pretty much had and just like witnessed. So yeah.
So for me, I feel like the only knowledge I really had was from like the news. And as we know, the news will pick up any story that kind of will bring attention. And I just remember it being like very wild and like very unethical. And like you're hearing about Trump presenting the accusations of fraud and, the fake ballots, and people are stealing from the ballot box. And, I feel like the true purpose of the election was not the true purpose. Like an election is supposed to, I mean, I guess there's going to be drama, there's going to be fights, there's going to be disagreements, but I feel like the true definition of like conducting an election was lost because of all of the drama and the accusations that were going on. And as for January 6th, that was a super sad, very, very rough situation. And I just remember seeing like all the media like covering it. And I don't know if it was on YouTube or something, but I saw like footage from January 6th, and it brought tears to my eyes because to see people be so angry and like hurting one another, like that is just absurd. And so the only real knowledge I have is from like the media. I wasn't like reading or like doing, research or anything like that. But that's really kind of what I saw from January 6th and how the 2020 election was really ran. Was it was very just corrupt and accusations, and there was one thing after another. So
Yeah. I kind of already answered the question ironically. What did I know about the 2000 election? Honestly, nothing. I just know my family has always hated Bush. I didn't really know why. But yeah, with the January 6th election, it was just it kind of shocked me because knowing like what happened earlier that year, no, I'm sorry, late 20, early 20, middle of 2020 in that June where people had attacked people were protesting in DC, that's what I'm trying to say, and how Trump had called out like the armed forces and stuff. But when this happened, he didn't do anything. It took them about, I believe, 4 hours to stop the whole riot and to call out law enforcement, which to me is like, what? Like, I remember I didn't even know it was happening. I remember just hearing about it. And I was like, what do you mean there's an attack on the Capitol by American citizens? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. Also, what I learned from the report is I didn't know that Trump earlier that day had made a speech almost inciting. He didn't say like go attack the Capitol, but he did say it. And it kind of shows that he really would go to no end to get himself back in office, which is disheartening that he's back there now. But it was just crazy. And also with Pence, that really I kind of made me kind of proud of Pence in a way because he was heavily bullied into trying to rig the election to vote in the Senate to make him president. And he stood his ground, even if he had to, almost have his life threatened and people attack him. So that was the most interesting things and kind of like like it kind of gave me a little bit of faith in people in the Republican Party.
I want to come back to something you said, Danae, and something you said, Lily. So I guess what Unit 8 left me with is our laws, kind of our election laws. One, no one knows them. I can't say that I had a full understanding of exactly, right, all of the steps that it takes from the time that you American Idol style bubble in, right, who you want to be president. And then the news, right, calls shots before everything's actually calculated, which is a challenge, right? Because in my mind, if you remove who's actually running for president, if it's Trump, if it's Biden, it doesn't matter. You could take advantage of that gap between what the news says is going to happen and the misunderstanding that we all have about how elections go to insert concerns about voter fraud or stolen election, right? If CNN says this person won Arkansas, then you think that person won Arkansas. If they weren't done counting the votes, and then they have to come back and say, oh, no, they didn't, then I can see how people would say, oh, you know what, there's some type of trickery or some type of fraud that's happening here. So we don't understand how the election laws actually work. I'd learned a lot more in Unit 8. The calling of elections, I think news stations probably pause instead of trying to get out in front of everything and just wait until all the votes are counted. That's the same thing that we learned about the 2000 election, right? With Jeb Bush, is that there was a whole problem with the count and everybody wanted to get in front of the count and what's the actual count. And then our laws are kind of squishy is the word that I'm going to use because they've always been allowed to be. We've never had to really shore them up because there's never been this type of contest to stay in or keep office or actually say, I don't care about any of the laws. I'm going to override them, because what we learned in the concession speeches from almost everybody but Trump was, if you say I lost, you kind of concede defeat and you say America's going to keep going. Please kind of support the president. But he's the first one that'd be like, nah, I don't care about any of that. You guys stole this election from me. And our lack of understanding, to just kind of tie it up, our lack of understanding of the actual rules is what allows that to happen on either side. I think. That's what I think.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Someone else going to talk. Oh, yeah, the point you made on the media and how people don't really understand it. So when news sources just like start rushing to it, you kind of just don't know what to believe because that was the problem with the 2000 election. A lot of news sources were calling the election early and they were calling it in favor of Gore. But what we've seen, especially with the 2020 election, is that sometimes mail-in ballots and other stuff take a while to get in. So even though, like, I think his name was Murray Elderman, even though he had full confidence in the election, he should have waited. And a lot of other news sources should have waited until the election night ended, because that really did cause like the snowball effect of what happened in the 2000 fiasco. So yeah, the media really did make it a fiasco, because if people who had the knowledge to understand elections had just waited to get all the facts, it would have been less of a, well, they stole it, they did it, they da 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 da, because people just listened to the news and they didn't have any other facts but news people being like, well, he won the election, they won the election. So yes, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and am I remembering correctly that they were all like using one source, that this one kind of guy or these two guys had created, and they're like, yeah, we have faith in this. And then even when they were like, hey, you should probably pause, no one said, hey, we should probably pause, or hey, American people know that the guy that created this was like, I don't know about this time. They just, to your point, went
Yeah. His
full-fledged.
system he had so much faith in that he was like, oh
Mhm.
no, it's solid, it's good. And
Mhm.
if he had just been like, well, let's take a step back and wait, it could have really stopped the chaos that was that election.
Yeah, that built us up to now.
Yeah, Danae, Ricky, you really hit like the nail on the head, especially when you're talking about like the media portion. And I feel like media, they have a tendency of like trying to give out the big story first, especially when it's like a huge story like this, because the news loves like controversy. Especially if you look at certain news outlets, they tend to report more negative news than like positive news and things of that nature. And I feel like especially like depending on the news outlet, like you have some news outlets that might be more right leaning, you have some that's more like liberal, you have some that's like more like center. And I feel like as people, we tend to just look at things that like we're familiar with rather than like looking at like the other side of things, because since you're familiar, you might look at Fox News because you like looking at Channel 5 like all the time, or you just might happen to look at like ABC just because you're used to that all the time. But I feel like it was just it's really important for people to get like news from like different sides, especially just like one person. I do find that kind of like crazy, because when I listen to it, I was like, well, there's no way that this one person can just have all of this information, so forth. And it just created like all this like chaos because of like this one person. So y'all really hit the nail on the head when it comes to like that media portion, and like how important it is for like news outlet to like report actual news, actual news.
Are we ready to move on to the next question?
For
So
sure, yeah.
one at a time.
Yep.
Okay. So, in your opinion, what were the most interesting, surprising, maddening moments in the January 6th report? Danae, I know you mentioned how long it took for the National Guard to get there, and I actually found it says in Appendix 2, they didn't get there till 5:20. So, this is like bizarre, right? So, you see what is happening, you see the violence that is unfolding, and they're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And I can't guarantee, but I'm sure if the National Guard had been there at least a couple minutes after the rioting and the violence had started, I'm sure the flame could have been put out a little bit. Granted, there were people going mad, obviously, but I think that was very shocking. Like, that is very, very shocking considering it could have been at least pulled back some. And I just feel like, again, Trump didn't say like, go start violence, go light buildings on fire, do this, but it was like, I think something about, he said he was going to walk down the roads with these people. And, the Republican Party, they're very, I mean, any party, they're very excited. They want to be involved. They want to, stand up for their candidate. But if you say one thing to a group of people, they're going to jump and they're going to do it. And if they're going to listen to him. So to kind of see that he was planning on walking alongside these protesters that's very intense. And that's a very bold statement. And not that he outright said, let's go attack the Capitol, but he did definitely add some fuel to the fire on that one.
Yeah. And we'll also like Trump had the power to call in police, the arms, like he is the head of the military. So he had the power to stop it. And people were telling him to stop it, but he didn't want to. And yeah, that was also really crazy to me that he wanted to walk with them. Like, I don't know, as almost like their armed leader. I don't to me, that whole thing sounded insane. But sorry, I was trying to find exactly where it is, but my computer's acting weird. But yeah, it was just weird to me that he wanted to walk with them because he was genuinely mad that he couldn't do it. And it was more of a security issue and stuff. But I don't know. It's that whole, yeah, that's a really troubling thing for me to get my head around.
I'll jump in. So there are kind of three things for me. One, it's you guys' conversation about him saying he wanted to walk, and maybe people following along to support their candidate. It seemed to me like a little bit more than just supporting of a candidate, right? There were allegations that I don't know that he used the word stolen election, right? But there was a strong inference that the election was stolen, was being stolen. We have to go and get our country back. And people reacted to that idea that, you know, the voice of the people was being overrun, and they went in order to kind of prevent that. And then violence escalated. You can argue, you know, did he intently, directly, expressly, overtly say go attack the Capitol? That's up for argument, right? And we saw that back and forth in the report with people on both sides. But what is very clear is, you know, there was a strong inference that the country was under attack, and particularly that the election was going to be stolen and that somebody needed to do something about it. So let's all go to the Capitol. What was really the thing that stuck out the most to me about the January 6th report was that Liz Cheney wound up being one of the biggest pieces of collateral damage. Liz Cheney, if you guys don't know who she is, like Dick Cheney was the Republican, period, like of his time. George W. Bush was president, but Dick Cheney was Republican number 2, right? You didn't get more conservative than Dick Cheney. And then Liz Cheney was also super duper conservative. Wyoming, no one ever challenged her. But when she actually said, no, guys, this is against the law, and this is how this person and his administration actually did illegal things, like they burned her to the ground at the stake like a witch. That's what jumped out at me the most about the January 6th kind of report and the whole proceedings and all the efforts of the kind of House Oversight Committee, was that you have this ultra conservative person whose dad was like Republican number 2 in charge saying these things are illegal. And instead of people believing her and all of the evidence that they produced, they instead burned her at the stake like a witch. And then the third thing was just the request for military intervention, and thankfully military leadership, including some generals and admirals, saying absolutely not, we're not getting involved on that level.
You kind of finished off on a good piece because not only from reading the report, but also personal experience. So at this time, I was a part of the DC National Guard. So I was like there as everything was going on. So from that perspective, like you're right, it was so much like fighting going on amongst like leadership because we have like generals, like senior generals saying that okay, this is a situation. I understand this, but this goes against like the army values and things that we put forth. But since you you volunteer at the end of the day, so that was kind of like used against us. It's like, okay, you volunteer, you sign this paperwork, you are under me, the president, as if I'm Trump, you're under me. I'm the head general of this. You go do as I say. And it was honestly like really terrible going against like your own like personal like values just to defend someone you don't really want to defend, and especially when you know something is like morally and ethically wrong. It was just a whole thing, so that made me switch to Virginia National Guard because I can't honestly, it was a lot, it was a big toll. But going based off of the reading, I'm sorry, the podcast, and specifically on the spinoff like episode, and it kind of invokes like concern within me and the reflection of the current state of like US politics. So I feel like this event really like reveal how deeply divided we are when it comes to like the political climate, which has become to the point where we get misinformation and different rhetorics escalating into violence, as we've seen, which undermine really the democratic like process that we try to like aim for within this country, right? So this report also, just to finish up, it really highlights the moments where institutional norms and individual courage was like really tested, just like I just spoke about my personal experience. But it also like exposed like how fragile these safeguards that we're supposed to have and the vulnerability of the democratic system to manipulate and to basically unrest. So it's like things only apply to you if you're a certain person, but if you over exceed those expectations, as we have these millionaires and billionaires within this office, those rules just don't apply to you at the end of the day, it seems as such.
I love it. Did everybody get a chance to weigh in on that set of questions? Are you guys ready to move on to the 2000 election? Yeah. Okay. And Shannon, thanks for your service. I can't imagine what it would be like to have kind of conflicting personal views and conflicting maybe leadership views. All right. So what did you guys
Ricky,
know?
I think we have one more question for the January 6th.
Oh, how do you feel about contemporary? Oh, yeah, that's what Shannon was just answering.
Oh, okay.
One of you have an answer for C that you want to contribute?
Um, no. We can move on.
The time. This is our time. Go ahead.
I just feel like now with Trump being our president again, I feel like there is a slight bit of uneasiness. Just because there are a lot of executive orders being talked about, and a lot of them directly impact like a very specific group of people. And I feel like that is very scary. And I feel like, I'm not saying it's targeted, but it certainly probably feels like that for some individuals. And I feel like we can only hope that the decisions will be ethical and they won't be targeted. But I feel like there is just a very scary, eerie feeling that this can affect now, this can affect future generations, this can affect children and grandchildren. And I feel like obviously the list goes on, but I hope that there will be a positive outcome rather than a negative. But who will actually know? We'll have to see because it's just begun. But I feel like January 6th, it's just a mark in history, and nobody will ever forget that day. So I just feel like hopefully we can, or they can live and learn and know how to navigate something like that if that does happen again. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Thanks for adding. Danae, do you have anything to add to that one too?
I'll just make this quick. I a thing about the January 6th report, and it's like kind of the overall thing, is Trump really had this whole he really did build up to what happened on January 6th, because even prior to the 2020 election, he had always said, if I were to lose, the election was rigged and the left is against us. And reading the report and seeing how it all played out, how it applies, it's just like, if he stays in power, this polarization between parties will never end, because he constantly makes it clear that if you're not with him, you're on the other side, and if you're on the other side, we're against you. So I don't know, just reading the report, it just kind of tied all kind of what Trump stands for into one. And yeah, I want to be with Lily. I hope it gets better. I really do. But I don't know.
I love it. I love it. What'd you guys know about the 2000 election prior to the set of podcasts?
So I wasn't born yet. So I was born in 03. So I didn't know much. I just know that there was a lot of, well, I guess I really didn't know anything. I really haven't talked about it prior to this, so I guess I really didn't know anything. But I feel like now that I know some, I feel like for somebody that was living in 2000 and was over the age of 18 years old, or had a mindset to be able to grasp all of that probably has a ton of feedback on that. So prior to all of this, I have no idea. So
I was around, that was kind of my January 6th. So I don't know if you guys heard the parts where people were outside trying to get into where the volunteers were actually counting the votes, right? So much like you, Shanna, people were just volunteers. They volunteer polling places to kind of shepherd people that are voting, and then making sure that everything is going according to process. And then you guys saw all the different recounts that had to happen, right, in these major districts. So as people were counting, then other people started to allege, and it was particularly the Republican Party, that the Democrats were trying to steal votes or trying to throw out legitimate votes. So there were people in office buildings where people were trying to count, banging on windows, trying to get in, demanding to get in, sending death threats to volunteers, to local officials, to everybody. It was like a distributed, slightly less violent, only because of police response, January 6th, where people thought again, like, oh, our votes are being stolen, our voices are not being heard. Had you guys heard about kind of Elian Gonzalez and the whole Cuban American population in Florida prior to these? What'd you find interesting about kind of any of that?
Uh, well, well, I have like a lot of thoughts in
I-
regards to it. I wasn't alive like during the time. I was born 2 years like after everything, but prior to like the listen of this podcast and like my general awareness for both of them, the 2020, not 2020, 2000 election. I feel like for me, the only reason why I know this much and like because it's Florida, everyone has like something like against Florida, and I never understood like why. Why was that? But once I got like the historic context and like the dramatic events in Florida that happened, that made like that determined the outcome. So like many knew, like my parents, like my family, like they knew about like the final results, like depending, and it only like depended on like a few hundred votes, I believe, when they talked about it. And my mom, she would just like tell me like, y'all don't know anything about like, January 6th until like you like live back then, but then like that yeah, it didn't really like come out to like what she was trying to say. Um, but just because of those few hundred votes and like nearly 6 million casted in Florida, I believe it said within the podcast. Especially with like George W. Bush and Gore, and world like to like the consensus of like legal and like the political battle like over recounts and like the ballot design that was then back then. And I feel like that it comes to like that prominent role of that butterfly ballots that was talked about as well, and resulting into like voter confusion, along with like eventual Supreme Court decisions with that Bush versus Gore. But it also stood out to me, and I'm pretty sure to like many others, like I said, like my parents and my family members, as like a public memory that everyone shared before, and now we now share with January 6th. So I feel like my most recognition when it comes to the 2000 like election, it has the same thing by highlighting that vulnerability in like the election process and having that like long term impact even now. Because I hear you talking about it, you're talking about like then versus now, and then versus now, like you can tell it's still an impact lingering like amongst like other people.
Yeah. Um, I've already said how I didn't know anything prior to this election, but going back to Elian Gonzalez, I think that case and also the issue with the airport, I believe, um that kind of, in my opinion, de-escalated Gore's whole stance in popularity in Florida, because the issues he stood on, but his lack of strong stance when it came to these issues and saying, yeah, this is wrong, or no, we shouldn't build that airport, and those kind of things, or should I, sorry, but anyways, those kind of things is kind of what made Gore lose so much favorability in Florida, which kind of started the de-escalation of it. In my science of elections class last semester, we actually did learn about this. We didn't learn the details, but we learned about like voting fraud and how the ballots impacted it. So it's just interesting. It's really the 2000 election is just one big butterfly effect. There was so many little issues that went into it, especially with the poking of the ballots and is this a vote, not a vote? Is this a dimple, not a dimple? That kind of thing that just really, like really one choice different could have changed the entire outcome of an election.
Agreed. Yeah. Gore lost a lot of credibility, not standing, as you've said, firmly on issues like the airport and whether or not Elian gets to stay or he gets to go. But even though he waffled, I think he would have lost anyway, because and here's why. What was interesting to me was not just that political parties will try to like gerrymander and tailor their voting districts, but then also they will cherry pick who they want to vote. Maybe we should throw out all the military votes, the overseas military votes. Maybe we should count them depending upon who they believe that demographic is going to vote for. That's the same thing that I think it was you, Lily, said earlier about the 2020 election with the mail-in ballots, right? So different parties will choose different demographics based on who they believe they're going to vote for and flip-flop on whether or not they should be counted. And the same with your dimples, right? Who's likely to have done this? Okay, throw those out. What was really interesting is that the courts weren't prepared for it, right? The courts went kind of back and forth and nobody was really clear on what the kind of Secretary of State's power was. Like, what did she have the power to do? What does she not have the power to do? The court says, okay, you can do it, but you only have 3 days, or okay, you can do it, but now you have 2 weeks. Okay, you can do it, but only in these 3 counties. Oh, okay, you can do it, but only in this one county. That's the same thing that's happening today. Is we have to wait for the federal courts to say, here's what you can do and here's what you can't do and how. And we're seeing conflict today amongst the lower courts and the Supreme Courts because the systems just haven't been tested like this, right? This election, in my opinion, the 2000 election was like the Raptors in Jurassic Park 1, testing the gates, right? Testing the fences. And they're still just kind of testing the fences. And hopefully like you guys have all said, the kind of shore up the gaps that we see. The last thing that I'll say about it is it's crazy how things can be politicized, right? You've got this child, Elian Gonzalez, he lands here, his mother dies from Cuba. It should have been something that we never heard about. Does he go back to his father or does he stay with his uncle? However, Republicans and Democrats saw it as a political opportunity to uphold this person, and so did the Cuban American community, not really caring about this child and whether he belongs here or with his dad, and used him just as political fodder. That's what I think the saddest thing was about the 2000 election.
Yeah, and that goes back into the play about media just doing more than it needs to. And also, you brought up a good point that they really didn't know how to handle the recount of the 2000 election. Like the Supreme Court literally said, this is our choice, but do not reference this if it ever happens again. Because we kind of just was like, because they were running out of time. So they were like, we made a choice basically to stop the recount because we don't know what's going on. And don't ever reference this again. And it's that even happened in the smaller courts, like the Florida Supreme Court and the other courts. They were like, well, because we don't really know, like, if they what their intentions were they right or not? Like, we don't know. So it was really one just big kind of thing, and let's just do what's best. And I do think with the Gore's popularity and like the way he handled it, it really did push it more towards Bush in Bush's favor. So that's all I have to.
Yeah, and the Republican Party had a real concerted effort to push, win, win, win. Lily, Shanna, either of you have anything to add there?
No, you guys did a good summary of everything we just talked about, but yep, that's it.
What do you guys want to choose for question number 3? Do you want to go legal rulings, political rhetoric, or media influence?
I kind of want to do media influence.
I'd agree with you.
I agree, since we hit on that a lot. I feel like that would be a good point.
Okay, so the first bullet is at one point, former Florida Secretary of State Catherine Harris tells the podcast host that the 2000 election wasn't a fiasco, and she said the media created the fiasco. What do you make of her assertion?
I remember reading when she was talking about it, and clearly it was a fiasco. I mean, as we all know, it was an absolute fiasco. It was crazy. There was so much going on, and I feel like when people tend to be interviewed on media, they can kind of suppress really what they want to say. And I'll like Trump and Graham, like going back to that unit, because I feel like it kind of relates to this. Graham felt one way, right? But he was like, I can't express that because even though I really can't stand Trump, I want to be his friend and I want to back him. So I feel like that really relates to like how Harris went on there and was like, well, it really wasn't, but yes, the media can influence a lot of negative insight and it can make it look really negative, but it really truly was. And I feel like she was suppressing that because she was protecting what had actually happened from the world. So,
I agree with that, and the reason why I say that is because I'm pretty sure it was you, Ricky. You were talking about how like some things should just like stay off the media, like some things we should just keep off of the media. And when it comes to like Catherine Harris, and she claimed like the 2000 election like wasn't a fiasco, but it's like the media created the sense of like chaos. And it kind of like reflected her perspective as someone who was tasked to like uphold that state law, possibly to like the point where they didn't want the way the public perception like perceive everything that was going on. So I think like while Harris like insists that like she followed like the legal points and acted honorably when it comes to this situation, her I feel like she kind of like heightened like the drama a little bit as well, especially when it comes to like the confusion to the way like the media handled and presented these events. So suggesting that their coverage was I say it was responsible for forming the content as like a big crisis, but however, like the View arguably downplayed the genuine like institution a confusion of the and the high stakes of like the legal wrangling and the characteristics that for that recount that needed to be done. Especially you talked about like how are they going to do it? Like how are they going to perform this task? Like what is the solution for this problem? So when it comes to like the real consequences of like those official decisions, I feel like both the media like it amplified and the official actions like kind of like shape the public's experience when it comes to the 2000 election.
Yeah, as we know, I've already touched on most of this, but yeah, I just agree with like Lily and both in you because I feel like it was a fiasco. I remember actually hearing this part and my face went, "What?" Because I was like, "This sounds like a fiasco to me." And I think if it wasn't put in the media, it would have been more of like a hidden issue and it would have still been a fiasco. It would have just been a fiasco that they could have covered up easily, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I feel like she just is remembering it different because than it actually was because I mean from her point of view, it wasn't as crazy, but if you were in the courts and you were the ones counting and all that, it was a lot going on.
I agree with you guys, and I have a slightly different take on Harris. Everybody was making things up as they went, right? Because they hadn't been presented with this particular scenario before. So everybody's making things up. Harris is saying, I have the power to just make it so. And then the courts are like, no, you don't, but only recount these 5 counties. And then the counters are like, we don't know how to count this. And we've already brought up the dimples and the butterfly ballots causing confusion. So they have to keep going back and saying, well, what do we do now? Well, what do we do now? Do we have enough time? Do we not have enough time? I think Harris personally has to go on and downplay any downplay the idea that it's a fiasco so that people don't lose faith in the whole election system. What you find out through all these units is that we've got this spider web of kind of laws that we've all just kind of respected. They've kind of been norms, but have never really been stress tested before. So what we saw in the 2000 election is they were stress tested. So if she goes on radio and says, or on news media and says, well, we've never really stress tested these, and there's a lot of gaps and holes, and we're not sure what to do, so we're trying stuff out. Can you imagine people not, again, causing a January 6th? So I think that's why she had to say, no, there's no fiasco. The media kind of overhyped this, is because her job was to, right, uphold that kind of election system. And I don't think she can just say, yeah, no, we're not sure what we're doing. We're just kind of doing things that we used to. But if anybody challenges us, it's a whole big thing. What if social media didn't exist in 2000? Yeah, it didn't really. Um, how do you think the fallout of the 2000 election would have gone? Do you think it would have been any different, knowing what you know about social media now?
Honestly,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, you could go.
Okay, I'm gonna try to keep it like short just because like for time and everything. I feel like it would have been like way more chaotic, especially like comparing it to like now. And like you can get information like so rapidly, like by the palm. It's literally in your hand, like the palm of your hand. Like you can literally just get any information at any time, anywhere, any place. And especially when it comes to like sharing platforms, I feel like it would have most likely like amplified like the real time misinformation, um, the uninformed rumors that we just talked about, and then the narratives about recounts and ballot issues, increasing public confusion and that mistrust that you were just talking about. Harris was trying to maintain that, but I feel like having the social media that we have now, it will definitely like disrupt what they were trying to maintain back then if they did had the internet that we have now. So I'm gonna just keep it short so everyone can answer.
Totally fine.
Yeah, no, just completely piggybacking off of that. I would say it would 100% be way worse. I mean, we've seen it with the recent elections, how different opinions have weighed in, and it just causes not even a fiasco, just chaos. And back to what Ricky was saying about Harris, it really was an accountability thing. That's why she kind of had to be like, no, it wasn't fiasco because it was an accountability thing. And I think if social media was a thing, politicians would have had to take accountability because it would have been such an uproar of like, you know how social media can, people will find your job, your house, your kids, your wife, your family. They will tear you down until you take accountability for your actions and the stuff that happened. So even like it would have been even down to like poll workers. Like it would have been a whole thing with accountability and attacking. So I 100% think that media would have made it worse.
I agree. I think the violence would have been greater, right? So we saw people show up at buildings, but they were smaller groups, right? Outside, nothing to the level of like January 6th. I think if there would have been social media, exactly like you're saying today, I think there would have been a heightened level of violence. There were physical trucks, we heard, moving around the highways, moving paper ballots. I think you would have been able to get a bead on those trucks and take them and do whatever you wanted to. I think we would have seen a lot more violence and disruption if the messaging would have gotten out quicker to more people. And I think it would allow people that want to kind of cause melees or violence to organize like they did on January 6th.
I think we all have a shared agreement. I definitely think it would have been a lot worse because word spreads fast on social media. Like I feel like I go on TikTok and I will scroll and I will see something like I never knew about. And then I fall into this rabbit hole of like research and I'm like, this was a thing. Like it just moves so quickly, like trends and stories and everything. So I definitely think, like Ricky said, like I feel like if they got a location on those trucks, like can you imagine? Like people are crazy. Like people I feel like would have followed the trucks, hit the trucks, like tried to run them off the roads. I mean, you truly don't know what people are capable of. So I definitely feel like if there was TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat, word moves extremely fast. So
Sounds like we all agree there. So we're at 10:52, you guys. Choice. There's a question 4 that's optional. However, there's only 4 of us. So what is your guys' thoughts about whether or not we stop at question 3 or try to get through question 4?
Are we still have to do 9 and 10, don't we?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because it's optional, I thought we should skip to unit
Okay.
9. At least try to get a little bit.
Okay. That
Go
works
for
for me.
You guys are a lot more prepared than I am on these
Yeah,
multiple.
like, please give me a second. Eight tabs.
Okay, 9. Oh,
Okay.
the Tea Party. Okay. Choose at least one. Da, 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 da.
For question 5.
Yeah, and then we choose a section
Okay.
and answer those 2 questions. So we
Okay.
just choose one and then we go to unit 10.
Perfect. Which section did you guys want to do? The strategy and structure, rhetoric and priorities, or did you guys still want to stay on that coverage and response part?
Uh, it's up to you guys. I don't care. I think we could go with any of them. Strategy and structure, I think I could jump in there.
Okay. That works for me.
So what I learned about the Tea Party, and I think I said this when we started, was, the US is really a 2-party system. You got Democrats, you got Republicans. Every now and then a third party candidate will show up, like a Green Party or a Libertarian. The Tea Parties started as the Christian right, and then the Christian right wasn't right enough, so then they morphed into the Tea Party. They tried to run on libertarian tickets. Libertarians figured out really quickly, wait a minute, you guys are not libertarians. And then some states weren't too friendly to third-party candidates, right? They couldn't get on the ballot everywhere. So they just determined we're going to take over the Republican Party little by little. And then some of their biggest strategies were, we're not going to really worry about where Democrats have, kind of a foothold. We're going to challenge Republicans that we don't think are kind of Tea Party enough. And that's what they started doing. They started to challenge in Republican districts with complete disregard for whether or not Democrats won. And we saw that in Virginia, right? The rise of the Tea Party and them contesting Republicans that weren't right enough or Christian enough caused them to actually lose a foothold and cause Democrats to actually win a majority of the Senate and the House in Virginia. But then the tide started to turn and they started to actually win over those Republican seats and push them out completely and get to the point where they took over the party, which, if you yada, 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 that winds up right at Trump, right? You've got the Tea Party, which leads us into kind of Graham and all the things that he did to protect Trump. And then Trump kind of takes over the whole party because they realize that's the best path to get their kind of Republican core values in office. And then we have Trump. Which evidence did I find the most compelling? And it's probably just that. It's the polls of where they went after Republicans and drove them out of office without care or regard for where Democrats were, and just started to push actual, just, what do they call them, rhinos? Republican name only, push rhinos out of office, take those seats, and then really buckle down into those, what do they call them? Kind of the grassroots organizations where they had the websites and the blogs, and the websites and the blogs all connected to other websites and blogs. So you didn't really hear them covered a lot because they were doing their own kind of organic demonstration and movement creation to go after these particular seats in state, local government, and then finally federal government.
All right, I'll love to piggyback off of that. So if I was talking to a friend and I wanted to give them like some information or some advice, like based on Bloom's research, I feel like the most effective way to like challenge that major parties is by working on their like existing structures. Especially if you look back at like history, the two-party system, as you were saying, Ricky, that's the construct that's been around for so long that it will be really hard to dismantle something that's been around for so long. The most you can probably do is changing that existing structure. So rather than doing the launch of a separate third party, I feel like there should be more reconstruction when it comes to that, because as we see now, you talked about those green parties and those third parties, especially when it comes like to like environmentalists and things like that. People, as we've seen like in this election, like people didn't know who to vote for. So I feel like this is the most I've seen someone vote for a third party, just because people couldn't choose. Put that in quotations, but you know. But I feel like, especially when we're coming to like the Tea Party, right? I feel like it gained like influence by like infiltrating the public Republican Party, just as you said, with the primaries and like pursuing party leaders, and even if risk immediate like electoral losses as well, if they really wanted to take that approach. But I feel like mainly like with this approach, it like leveraged the parties like establish and ballot access as well, which kind of like avoided unformidable like legal and like structural obstacles as well faced by if it was a third party, the third parties would have to face those efforts as well. So to replicate like their success, they should build like a more cohesive, more motivated network, and like craft those issues within like their supporters in order to support that, right? And take it more into like a strategical like target approach when it comes to this. And I'm pretty sure it was like in chapter 1 it talked about to always remember that lasting change comes from the president organizing actions in order to like shifting a party's priorities, because that person is the face. And if you want people to stick to what you say, which a lot of people loved Obama for, is he was like that hope, and he was that structure for a lot of people, and it embodied that within their voters. Um, to finish up, the evidence I would pretty much give, like when it comes to this, is Bloom's like content, like analysis when it comes to like the Tea Party activists and the leaders. To me, were like particularly like compelling. So her analysis basically like blog like with the blogs like websites, it showed like what truly motivated the Tea Party was not just one thing, but a strong sense of like structures, a structured threat, I would say, because people team up when they're trying to go against something that's like threatening the majority, and towards like different cultural changes that we're used to, which going to back to that two-party system, because we're used to that as like people. Yeah, I'm gonna finish off right there.
Yeah, piggybacking off what you said, obviously there's good strategies in what they did. It's just the outcomes were not. It's like, oh, okay. But I would say it's definitely a change of party from within, because as you said, third parties usually don't get elected and they usually don't get seats. So it would be change a party with them within. Like in chapter 3, when she conducted those 35 interviews based on people joined the Tea Party based on issues they had in the party that weren't being addressed. So to start with something as small as that and then using that to build further structure, and because it did, and what evidence I would say to do that, it did get them far, because they ended up having caucuses in, well, scrolling in 3 of the Congresses, and they ended up actually having a lot of power in Congress that if people didn't, obviously, this is not the part they should use, but if people didn't agree with them, they ended up kicking them out because they had so much power in Congress. So, yeah, just to summarize, I would think it's just kind of work from the party within, like an like in out kind of thing. Start with a small issue that a lot of people didn't agree with, like the Tea Party did, which was the distrust in the Republican Party and their stance on immigration and their whole changing of conservatism, and then moving further in that because it did work for them and they succeeded.
To piggyback off of Danae, I think it was like a structural thing. And I feel like the distrust was like very apparent, right? Like it was very clear that there was like a lack of that internally. And as we know, for there to be trust externally, you have to establish it within first. So I definitely think it was a structure thing. And I think it was chapter 1 where it talked about like the huge increase of local tea parties that had formed. And it was like they were just like popping up everywhere. And it wasn't even a unified thing. Like they were just all separated. They were doing one thing, one was doing the other. And it's like you can't become one and structured and establish that trust if there's tens of thousands of other tea parties around. And so I feel like it definitely is a structure thing. And I think if there was a structure, could it have been better? Maybe, but there wasn't. So that just resulted in distrust and, there was not a shared agreement. And then if it doesn't work internally, it's certainly not going to work externally. So.
Yeah, agreed. Part of the analysis that she did showed all the different comments that came up on blogs and websites and how often they did. And you're right, there was no kind of cohesive core set of strategies or policies. But if memory serves, Danae, you're right, immigration was a challenge everybody had. Everybody seemed to be really upset that Obama won, and kind of grievances, like a large grievance. If I remember, those were kind of the top 3 things that all of the Tea Party, right, regardless of their little different kind of hallways, that was what kind of kept them all going. Let's say that. That's what motivated most Tea Party members, was grievance, immigration, and the fact that Obama won, and specifically, I think it was Obamacare, right? The Affordable Care Act that people were pissed off about. Okay. We have to do Unit 10. Does that sound right?
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
skip the optional.
it says question 6 is required, 2 questions, optional 7's optional, and then 8 is choose at least one, and then it's like the 2 questions in the box thing again. So
All right, let's do this fast. What time does this cut off? What time's the recording cut off for us?
I think we're allowed to go at 11:15.
Yeah.
We've been allowed to go, but it cuts off at 11:30.
What did I know? What did we know about the political scandals, in particular about Lindsey Graham? And then what was the most interesting, surprising, or maddening thing that you guys learned in kind of the Unit 10?
Since I've mentioned it a couple of times. So prior to listening to the podcast, I had no idea who Lindsey Graham was. And just I didn't know. And so when I kind of got into the podcast, I could have listened to the podcast and read the transcript 100 times over. I thought it was so interesting because it was like you could see the clear manipulative like tactics that were happening with Graham and Trump, and like that was so interesting. And I feel like it was just bizarre to really see like Graham going and sitting with, the news and the media and blatantly lying to protect what actually had happened with Trump and what was happening. So prior, nothing. I did not know anything. To answer the second question, I feel like what was most interesting for me, and I guess Graham's behavior, was he lied. And he would lie and he would protect and he would sugarcoat things. And like, that's really scary because we aren't there and we're not actively listening to what is actually happening. And so we have to interpret what we see on media or what we're told, and we can only assume that that's actually what is happening. So him going and saying, well, Trump's not doing anything wrong, but really, as we know, Graham internally was like, this is terrible. This is not good. I clearly have other emotions about it. And I just feel like he had, and like in episode 3, he had spoken up about Trump's like slur that he had made in a meeting, but then he wouldn't even say what was said. So he spoke up and then he was like, oh, I shouldn't have done that because now I don't want to get Trump in trouble. So I just feel like his behavior was just, he was manipulated and he was convinced that Trump honestly was trying to do good. But in reality, as we know, it wasn't good. So.
Yeah, so the 2015, 2016 election, almost all of the Republicans, there were like, what, 17 or 20 all running against each other. And this, they highlight Graham here, but then also of note is Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, all saying this is a narcissist, xenophobe, racist bigot. We can't have him in the White House. And then as soon as Trump really starts to show that, hey, I can bully you into doing what I want because I will primary you and you'll Lindsey Graham was a big deal, right? He was the governor, I think, of South Carolina and then was in Congress forever. What jumped out at me was not that he was lying, right? Because people started to realize Rubio, Graham, that, oh my God, we're going to get put out. We'll lose our power if we don't go along with this. This is the way the Republican Party is going. What really bothered me is that he signed with Trump the idea that we could use to go and steal oil from Middle Eastern countries, because no, that is actually illegal. That is international law, and that's been in place, international law that's been in place like post World War II. Yes, he shouldn't have lied about like the phone calls that Trump made. Everybody knew that those phone calls were actually kind of quid pro quo, I think is the word that they use, and illegal. He saw all kind of laws being broken, but they were kind of left up to interpretation. The military oil, in my opinion, that one's not left into interpretation. That is actually illegal. And McConnell was like, yeah, don't care. We should go and do it. He just got to the point where he would rubber stamp anything for Trump until he found out he was going to be put out of office anyway. And then he's like, yeah, this guy's a problem.
I agree with that. Um, when it comes to this, like per se, like when it comes to, I didn't know much about him until he was like political. The most thing I knew about him is when I was a child and I used to see him on Undercover Boss and I just knew that was him. But but then like moving on to I guess like his political when it comes to him in politics, the most I knew about him was the investigation with him in Russia when it came to like the election when people said that they were involved when it came to his win. So that's pretty much all I really knew. But after listening specifically to like this podcast when it comes to Graham, I feel like I learned that it really explores like how many Republicans, but notably we're talking about Lindsey Graham, like repeatedly excused Trump's like actions and resisted accountability, just like as you said, Lily and Ricky, when it comes to his wrongdoings, and even to the point where they were resisting the measures of things such as like impeachment. So despite like once criticizing Trump. I forgot what page, not page, but what podcast it was when it literally went through a whole list of every single quote when it comes to Ted Cruz, JD Vance, all the negative Ramaswamy when it comes to them and like all the negative they were saying about Trump just to turn around and it kind of seems like they're using him for their political gain, but in actuality, it's like they're literally Trump's puppet, as described to me within this listen. But even though they criticized Trump, they're defending him during both impeachments and helped discredit like the processes when it came to that. So arguing that they were going to incite like violence or it's going to like divide the country. Right? But the text, I would think, will also like discusses like how party loyalty is normalized even when someone is doing this much wrong. And Trump's behavior is very unexcused when it comes to the things he's done. So.
Yeah, that's a good point you made about all the people who were once against him and then ended up being for him. A lot of people thought he was too dumb to do too much harm. So it was like, let's just use this man and let's help ourselves gain politically, which we saw wasn't the best. But when it comes to his insurrection, not his insurrection, sorry, his impeachment and all that, it's just I remember somewhere in the podcast it said that you can't have checks and balances if one party isn't willing to work. And there's so much truth behind that because the Republican Party refused to hold him accountable. And there has been presidents that Graham has called for impeachment and backed up their impeachment. And when it came to Trump, he did everything to defend him. And he was like, no, he didn't do it. He said it wasn't big enough to warrant an impeachment, which I don't understand how an insurrection isn't, but I digress. The biggest shocking thing to me about Graham and his argument was I remember it was in episode 3, this Tuesday Trump and this Thursday Trump thing. That part kind of just made me laugh because it was like, oh, he's just Thursday Trump, and that's why he says these crazy political things. But he really is a good person, and that is shown in Tuesday Trump and the Trump I met on the golf course. He kind of tried through his, when he was on media, tried to humanize Trump in a way, and but it did it to a point that he was kind of treating him, in my, it sounded like he would treat a kid. Like, oh yeah, they have bad behaviors, but they're really a good person if you like give him a chance and you only approach him on good days of the week. But it was also with the Tuesday Trump and the Thursday Trump thing. One was more publicized than the other. So obviously he was on his best behavior for the more publicized one than the more private one.
I want to add to something that you said today. I forgot to mention earlier that Graham and everybody flip flop, not just in the way that they kind of spoke about Trump when they were campaigning against him, but actually, I don't know if you guys remember the Supreme Court justices, right? So when Obama was saying, you know, I get to put some Supreme Court justices up, they said no. Right, Graham in particular was like, the president can't do that. And then Trump comes along and they go, oh, he can absolutely do this. And when he was confronted even by his own party, like Liz Cheney, he flipped out on everybody, the Republicans, the Democrats, everybody, in order that, I think it was Kavanaugh's, right, kind of hearing. He flipped out on everybody at Kavanaugh's hearing, was like, no, absolutely, the president has the right to do this. And that's why now we have this kind of heavily conservative Supreme Court. It's because Graham flip-flop on president's authority to kind of add additional justices. Anybody have anything to add to that question, or are you guys ready to close out with question 8?
I'm ready to close if that's fine with everyone.
Go for it.
All right, so we have 2 sections here. Which side did you guys want to do?
I feel like I don't really care actually, but I feel like backsliding and constitutional crisis could be interesting.
Okay, who wants to start there? I'll go. I'll start. I'll say on point number 1, I think it's trying to remove birthright citizenship is a constitutional crisis that is particularly in the Constitution. Also, the second thing that really I think is a constitutional crisis and a little bit of backsliding is due process, right? The 14th Amendment, as we talked about a lot, the first half entitles us all to due process. But the idea that you don't have to have due process, and then back that up with the idea that birthright citizenship could be at risk. I think those are both constitutional crisis, and we've seen the Supreme Court lean in at least on the due process side, and I don't know that they have leaned in yet on the end of birthright citizenship, because the president, even though the Supreme Court said he's kind of got immunity for January 6th, I don't know that that ruling means he can then not amend, but reinterpret the Constitution differently than Supreme Court justices, the ultimate arbiters of the Constitution, have in the past.
I'm
That's
so
fine.
sorry, guys. I was talking and I was muted the whole time. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Ricky.
Yeah.
But for this question, when it comes to like a constitutional crisis, I feel like one thing that's surprising, but like also like upsetting at the same time, when it comes to like Trump's like executive like outreach, during like the first 100 days was that so-called Department of Government Efficiency when it led by Elon Musk, which I believe was like established like without any constitutional approval or constitutional basis like at all. It was just pretty much of I want this. I'm going to do this. No one has a say so but me because I am president. So like I feel like with this entirety is like very significant when it comes to like control over like federal programs, as we're seeing now, especially with like the funding and him deciding where it goes and no one else gets to decide. I feel like I feel like it just doesn't align with like the administration and how the administration should be when it comes to establishing anything federal wise. And it also makes me think about like what are his and like the others like political goals, like does him bypassing like that legislative like authority. So I feel like the fact that like a non-elected official was given so much like power to like reshape a federal budget is very shocking. Isn't shocking because it's Trump, but it's just very shocking because it actually happened. And I feel like it shows like a clear picture of like the Constitution, like separation of like powers that we talked about with throughout the podcast. So I feel like this president like move really like highlights like how quickly the democratic norms and constitutional like checks can be undermined by like executive actions.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that really quickly. Sorry. It's unconstitutional, some would submit, because Congress has a power of the purse. And once Congress has appropriated funds, then that's it. Nobody is able constitutionally to go back and say, no, we will not appropriate these funds per Congress. Sorry.
Yeah. Truly everything he's done in his first 100 days has just been surprising, upsetting, questionable, especially the birthright citizenship thing, because I'm grandchild of immigrants, so that would openly affect my parents' citizenships. So, which you can't do because they are American citizens, and especially I've taken immigration class. So, with all the deportation we're learning about and how he's deporting American citizens because there's no due process of law, like I believe Ricky said. There's there's just he's just loading people up and then he's sending people who are citizens away because there's really no structure on how he's moving because he's just taking his I feel like he's like a kid throwing a tantrum right now, best way to say it. He's just going on a rampage and nobody's stopping him. And as I said earlier, checks and balances can't exist without the parties cooperating, and the Republican Party would have to take accountability and be like, no, we messed up here to enact checks and balances on what he's doing. And they're not doing that because it's kind of hard for people to take accountability. So yeah, that's my concerns on the political parties, and especially I don't know if we've seen recently he is openly talking about a third term. So and there is many amendments he's breaking by doing that, but nobody seems to be checking him, and that seems to be a constant thing that he's done in his 100 days. So that's all I have to say.
I like Danae said, everything's been very shocking. There has been a lot that has transpired, and there has been a lot of thoughts and backlash, and Trump will be Trump. So I think I heard about if your name doesn't match your birth name or something on your birth certificate. I don't know if y'all heard about that, but it's like something about the name that he has like introduced and said that he's gonna make it that way. So like if your name doesn't match on your birth certificate or something, you can't vote. I don't know if that's been fully put into law or anything. But I think that was like super shocking, and like that's bizarre, and like the birth rate thing and all of that is like very scary, and especially because I mentioned earlier, I feel like it's very, not that it's targeted, but it's really hyper focused on like a set group of people, and that is very scary for those individuals. Like that is very, very unsettling. And I think that Janae also said this, like with the checks and balances, like will we ever really have a true democracy? Like with everything that's going on, will we ever really have that? And it's like our political parties, one, are just all over the place, and it's like there's not a set end goal. And I feel like that's again a structure thing, whatever it may be. I just feel like it's not, it's unsettling, just to leave it at that. It's unsettling, and who actually knows what is going to happen, and who knows what's going to transpire. So, and again, for a set individuals, it is extremely alarming. And it's like you're sitting watching the news in the morning, and it's like one thing after another, and another executive order, and he's talking about doing this, and then it is very unnerving. So
Yeah, I would submit, Lily, that it's not just a group of individuals that may find concern. Danae brought up the fact that her grandparents are, citizens by birth. That is not one of the squishy things that I mentioned earlier. That is clear language in the Constitution that has been interpreted over and over and over by the Supreme Court. So if the Constitution doesn't say who a citizen is, then what does? And this administration has been arguing that it's this administration alone, not Congress, not the actual federal court. So the question that I have to answer that second bullet is, will Congress stand up and say, this is not actually your power, this is our power, so we won't allow you to do that? And will the Supreme Courts, and we're maybe starting to see some of this with them saying, hey, go and get the wrongfully, and I know everybody's using the word deported, but I won't use that word deported, because that doesn't follow. If Danae, you've taken immigration courses, that doesn't follow the normal course of deportation, right? You can use whatever you want, what word you want to there. But if the Supreme Court has said, hey, go and get them back, and this administration has said, hey, we can't, we admit fault in court, but we can't get that person back, these people back. So if the Constitution doesn't say who's a citizen, then which of us are our citizens, and then allowed our due process, our day in court? Question mark. That's the concern that I think some people may find themselves having right now.
Yeah. And just like a closing point, like how this government, this current administration and the current Congress and etc., how they move with the next 3 years and following really determines our democracy. Because if they let him keep going, whoever's next in power, it's like it'll be almost too much of a mess that I mean, regardless what he's already done, will take decades to recover. But if he keeps going, like our democracy will be, I don't want to say destroyed because that seems a little extreme, but for lack of better words, destroyed.
Further abused.
Yeah, to piggyback, you said so many good points. Because one, I am concerned. I'm very concerned that like our political parties and like our institutions may fail to provide like necessary checks and balances, especially like for not even for like a democracy, but like a functioning like society. And you talked about like for the next person, like the next person in office. I feel like even if someone knew what's to come and they tried to like reinforce certain things that were ignored during both of his terms, I feel like we're already creating like a trend. So if someone was to push something out, the president was to push something out, oh, we don't have to listen because the previous president, he did A, B, and C. He did do those things by the Constitution. So like, why should we listen? I feel like it's going to create like that trend that people won't even take like the government really seriously. And I really feel like especially listening to Dr. Reckendorf's and Dr. like Newman's piece when he talked about, are we in a constitutional crisis? And a part of me feels like yes, because literally as we've seen in the podcast when it comes to Graham, right? He he and other Republicans, they wanted loyalty over institutional like integrity altogether. So like I feel like this like underlines like the oversight and establishing like those executive outreaches that we already implement within our constitution. And with these repeating dismissals of the watchdogs and disregarding the judicial authority, it creates that like that normalized behavior of getting rid of those democratic norms that we once had. So just to finish up with this last question, I feel like this trend signals that the legislative like increasingly performs as a like I say like a compared to like a rubber stamp rather than like a true checks and balance because it just seems like something that can just be ripped off. It doesn't matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it seems like to like many others, like it doesn't matter at all.
Fab. Thanks, ladies. Do we have anything else that we need to answer?
No, somehow used all our time.
Yeah, we did.
Well, thanks, ladies. It's been wonderful speaking with you this
Y'all too. Thank you. And good luck with the rest of the semester.
Thank
Oh,
you
you're
so much.
graduating, Danae. Good luck with your one more year.
Yes,
But
Yes.
so close.
you got it.
Congrats, everyone, on graduating.
All right, bye.
Yes.
Thank you guys.